The chamber held silence like a blade drawn but not yet swung. The alien stood at its center, scars etched deep into chitin and synthetic graphs humming low under the strain of movement. No one dared interrupt. Not because they respected him, because they didn't understand why someone so mutilated was still standing. His eye, the only one left, did not blink. It stared forward with the unrelenting certainty of someone who had escaped something worse than death. He didn't request attention. He didn't beg. His voice, when it came, was low and precise, stripped of ceremony. "They are not what you believe," he began. "You think they're primitives, newly interstellar, fueled by emotion and chaos. That is your first and final mistake." Counselors exchanged glances, some amused, others curious, a few already dismissing him with the disdain born of absolute power. But he continued without pause. "You will expect conquest to frighten them. It will not. You will expect firepower to overwhelm them. It will not. You will expect them to break under pressure. They never do. They do not shatter, they recalculate." He paused, not for effect but to allow the translation nodes to relay every syllable accurately. No one interrupted. Some waited for tactics or logistics. He offered none. They lost their planet a dozen times in history. Flood, fire, disease, war, none broke them. They evolved not in peace, but in agony. Their civilization was shaped by extinction and refusal. They do not fear annihilation because they have built from it before. A high chancellor coughed, not out of politeness but irritation. Still, the veteran pressed on. "When we landed, we brought superiority. Ships 10,000 years ahead of their aerospace. Weapons they couldn't pronounce, let alone counter. What did they do? They watched. They studied. They adapted before our boots hit their soil." He lifted what remained of his left arm, a prosthetic with exposed nerve metal threading. "They let us win the first hour. We thought it over. Celebrated the silence. But the silence was a trap. They made us comfortable. Then they started. Piece by piece, they dismantled our control. Not through force, but through uncertainty. Ambushes without bodies. Attacks without signatures. Systems failed with no trace of sabotage." The chamber had grown still. Not out of belief, but unease. "One by one my squad vanished. No screams. No alarms. Just silence, and then nothing. Some ran. Some resisted. All disappeared. I survived because they wanted me to." Another pause. This time it lingered. "They let me go with one message. Not in my tongue, not through translation. They spoke it in my mind, warn them. We don't want war, but we are not afraid of it." Snorts of disbelief rose in low tones from several council seats. "You doubt them because your conquests have been effortless. But Earth is not like the others. They do not measure victory in territory or population. They measure it in survival. If you kill one, they create 10 more. If you destroy a city, they learn how to build it underground. If you take a planet, they figure out how to reclaim it from beneath your feet." The projection in the center of the room flickered on, images of Earth's geography, military data, intercepted transmissions. "You've read their dossiers. You've seen the casualty ratios. You've studied their unaligned colonies and wondered why they keep thriving without aid. That's not resilience. That's design. They were born for this." A general interrupted, tone sharp and superior. "If they were so capable, why aren't they expanding? Why haven't they come to us?" The veteran turned slowly toward the voice. "Because they don't want more. They want enough. The rest of us hunger. They endure. And endurance is the one thing you cannot conquer." A hush settled in. The weight of his final words hung in the air. "You think this is strategy. It is not. It is survival. And humans are the masters of survival. If you invade, they won't resist with fleets. They will bury your confidence in silence. They will let you win, until you've already lost." The lights dimmed as the projection ended. He didn't wait for dismissal. He turned and walked out, each step metal against stone, echoing louder than any applause or rebuttal. Not one word followed him. No one believed him. But none of them laughed. Orbital dominance was established within minutes. Earth's defense satellites fell in synchronized bursts, rendered inert by targeted EMP pulses. Communications across continents collapsed. Power grids failed. Surveillance arrays blinked out one by one. From the Empire's perspective, it was textbook execution, precise, surgical, absolute. The homeworld was blinded, muted, and wide open. No resistance signals. No retaliation. Just silence. Fleet Command logged the operation as a success. Ground forces were dispatched in coordinated waves. Dropships descended toward major cities, encountering no aerial resistance, no planetary shields, no combat formations. Human infrastructure appeared intact, untouched by scorched earth failsafes. Streets were deserted. Towers stood dark. Entire regions were quiet, as if abandoned mid-motion. Scouts moved through empty urban zones, weapons at the ready, sensors on full spectrum. Drones scanned for heat signatures and movement. Nothing. Not a single combatant. No traps. No mines. It looked less like a battlefield and more like a ghost planet. For a moment, doubt formed, but was quickly overridden by protocol. Units established temporary command zones. No engagement. No signs of defense. No need for force. The assumption, humanity had folded under shock. A race unprepared for an interstellar strike. Commanders filed preliminary occupation reports. Victory seemed imminent. Then the disruptions began. First were the visual anomalies. Surveillance drones vanished from the network. Not destroyed, just gone. No alarms, no telemetry loss. They simply ceased to respond. Patrol units sent to investigate failed to return. Backup teams followed. Silence greeted them. Military networks began experiencing random latency. Comms dropped intermittently. Standard encryption keys stopped synchronizing. A technical glitch, assumed the engineers, until static-ridden audio streamed back into the command net. A single phrase looped, distorted and broken. Asterisk. You're inside now. Asterisk. Moments later, a perimeter unit picked up rapid movement in a sector deemed secure. By the time command accessed their live feed, the image had frozen mid-frame. All that remained visible was an armored human silhouette, visor lit in red, dragging an Empire operative across broken concrete. The feed cut abruptly. Retrieval teams dispatched found no bodies, no blood, no equipment, just scorched outlines on the ground. Across other cities, the pattern repeated. Loss of signal. Sudden blackout. Fleeting contact. Every attempt to trace the disruptions failed. Jammers were ineffective. Signal triangulation yielded impossible results, locations that didn't physically exist, or moved as soon as they were locked. Command attempted to regroup. All forces were ordered to return to their central deployment hubs. But entire platoons never responded. Environmental scanners picked up human presence but couldn't fix on direction or numbers. Heat signatures faded too fast. Kinetic sensors read interference even in empty zones. They weren't being fought. They were being stalked. Orbital Command scrambled to provide thermal overlays. What they received made no sense: enemy movements that phased in and out of detection, unregistered vehicles that operated with zero emissions, and ground-level electromagnetic distortion forming geometric patterns far too deliberate to be natural. This wasn't panic. This was control. Empire forces began dying, quietly, without spectacle. One by one, units were reduced to scattered armor fragments, weapons missing, dog tags collected in deliberate piles. Psychological warfare specialists reviewed the scenes. The implications were surgical. There were no firefights. There were no firefights because the enemy refused to be seen. Attempts to deploy orbital bombardments failed. Guidance systems redirected mid-launch. Impact zones shifted milliseconds before detonation, missing entirely. Sensor teams confirmed that local satellite debris had been repositioned into decoy orbits, warping the targeting grid with gravitational noise. Human engineers had weaponized their own wreckage. Hours passed. Not a single human soldier had been captured. Not one had surrendered. Not a single voice had answered calls for negotiation. Humanity did not reply. It only watched. Empire commanders began removing identifying insignia from their armor. They moved in smaller groups. Lightless. Silent. Their protocols had inverted, now they were hiding. Entire cities remained unentered. It wasn't fear. It was avoidance. The unknown had taken priority over occupation. In fleet reports, Earth was no longer marked as a target zone. It was labeled unstable. No active threat. No clear enemy. No strategic gain. Just unresolved status. They had come expecting resistance. What they found was anticipation. Humanity had not been surprised, they had been ready. And readiness, to the Empire's dismay, had never involved meeting them head-on. The ground was theirs only on paper. In reality, it belonged to shadows. Shadows with human eyes. The decline didn't begin with a battle. It started with silence, deeper than before. Communications between regiments grew sporadic. Entire battalions reported internal malfunctions without source or trigger. HUD overlays blinked erratically. Visors flickered with false readings. Tactical AI began misclassifying terrain and identifying friendly units as hostile. Officers wrote it off as atmospheric interference. But the systems had never failed under worse conditions. Sentries started reporting movement at the edges of camps. Not attacks, just glimpses. Shapes standing still too long. No thermal signatures. Nothing on radar. Patrols sent to investigate found nothing, but those soldiers stopped sleeping. They said they were being watched. When their helmets were removed, biometric logs showed heightened stress markers and abnormal neural spikes. One soldier transmitted footage showing an empty corridor in a secure facility. Nothing moved. Yet every 30 seconds, a shadow shifted without source. The footage looped. The feed was purged. He was reassigned. A week later, his unit ceased contact. Within days, command hubs began receiving conflicting field reports. One claimed heavy engagement in Sector Theta. Another from the same coordinates stated no contact. Surveillance drones verified both reports as authentic, but they contradicted each other. Nothing made sense. Empire forces had been trained against conventional chaos, ambush, sabotage, insurgency. But this wasn't chaos. It was precision-engineered psychological collapse. Rations were left untouched. Soldiers stopped removing armor. They whispered in hallways, never louder than a breath. Eyes scanned corners with practiced paranoia. They weren't expecting combat anymore. They were expecting inevitability. Then the voices started. Encrypted channels began transmitting unauthorized signals. Voices of dead commanders issued false orders. Messages arrived stamped with proper authentication but directed troops into dead zones, places no one returned from. Audio logs recovered from abandoned dropships contained whispers repeating names of missing soldiers, despite no personnel on board. Combat units refused to patrol without air support. Pilots refused to fly without full squadrons. Morale disintegrated not through defeat but through uncertainty. The enemy had made itself unknowable. What little the Empire understood unraveled by the hour. Attempts to regroup failed. Rally points were overrun not by direct attack, but by internal collapse. Leadership broke first. Officers executed each other under suspicion of infiltration. Entire units fired on their own shadows. Some detonated charges to sanitize regions already cleared. Fleet analysts noted a sharp rise in unauthorized transmissions. Data patterns showed embedded messages in static, deliberately structured, not random. AI decryption failed to extract meaning. Human linguists embedded in translation teams reviewed the audio. One phrase repeated across frequencies, hidden in low-band distortions. Asterisk. We are behind you. Asterisk. Panic evolved into ritual. Soldiers began carrying mirrors. Some smeared ash over their armor to distort visibility. Camouflage routines were manually disabled. The war had shifted into paranoia. They weren't fighting enemies. They were fighting the thought of enemies. In one notable incident, a division transmitted emergency codes claiming atmospheric madness had taken hold. All personnel were ordered into cryosleep for protection. Recovery teams arrived to find the pods empty. Logs showed self-initiated activation, no override, no external hack. The field commander's final note read, asterisk. Better silence than screaming. Asterisk. By then, upper echelons of the Empire had stopped reviewing casualty numbers. They served no purpose. Reports now prioritized psychological evaluations. Terms like combat-induced hysteria were replaced with environmental instability. New recruits were no longer being sent. Deployment ceased without ceremony. Attempts to retreat were obstructed. Transports vanished. Not exploded, not shot down. Just missing. Orbiting ships reported full manifests. Then silence. The last known location always shared one trait: zero human presence on record, but full atmospheric disruption consistent with unauthorized propulsion. Eventually, a directive was issued: silent evacuation. No announcement. No trace. But it was too late. No safe corridors remained. Every exfiltration route had been mapped. Earth didn't block their escape. It simply closed the exits without being seen. Not a single enemy had fired on them. Not a body had been left behind. There was no war front, no defined enemy lines. The Empire had not been defeated by force. It had been dismantled by fear calculated to the molecular level. What remained on Earth wasn't resistance. It was orchestration. Cold. Inhuman. Inevitable. And behind it all, the one thing no sensor could trace, no AI could counter, a human will honed by extinction and carried forward not with rage, but with discipline. It began without warning. Not an attack, an announcement. Empire relay stations intercepted a transmission of Earth origin, flawlessly encoded into their own fleet language. No demand, no declaration. Just a single phrase, translated without ambiguity: "Now we come for you." Within minutes, key communications satellites across the outer Empire territories went offline. Not destroyed, reprogrammed. Long-range comms rerouted themselves into silence. Central Command lost visibility of 17 sectors in under an hour. At first, no pattern could be identified. Then the anomalies spread. Orbital maintenance drones on fringe colonies began detonating in synchronized arcs, shredding docked cruisers with their own protective hull plating. Navigation beacons twisted coordinates, sending returning supply convoys into the gravitational pull of dead stars. Fleet algorithms began rejecting their own encrypted commands, overriding with unknown subroutines that mimicked original coding signatures. The virus wasn't invasive, it was indistinguishable from the systems themselves. Before the Empire could respond, their orbital defenses began collapsing. Not through direct assault, but with pinpoint kinetic strikes. Human vessels, unregistered and near invisible on sensors, dropped tungsten rods from high altitude at velocities no shield could absorb. Impact craters the size of capital ships appeared without energy signatures. Entire stations were reduced to burning wreckage before their alert systems even activated. Retaliation was attempted. Empire warships launched full-spectrum sweeps across suspected human vectors. They found nothing. Then their targeting software began self-correcting to invalid coordinates. Gun turrets locked on friendlies. Missile guidance reversed polarity mid-flight. One fleet flagship opened fire on its own escort line, its crew helpless as the ship's own combat systems rejected manual overrides. The human incursion didn't disable enemy systems, it turned them against their creators. Simultaneously, command networks were infiltrated. Propaganda screens within capital stations displayed faces, Earth soldiers from past invasions, presumed dead. Each video lasted seconds, accompanied by planetary coordinates no longer under Empire control. The images never repeated. No demands followed. No explanation. Just evidence of execution carried out with surgical rhythm. Ground installations received similar treatment. Human strike teams breached fortified bunkers without breaching charges, entering through maintenance shafts never mapped in the official blueprints. Security footage was erased in real time, replaced with time-stamped footage showing the aftermath: empty corridors, powered-down defenses, officers missing without trace. A classified weapons depot located near the Empire's core zone detonated at full yield. No approach detected, no warning issued. Black box recordings confirmed the failsafes were manually triggered by internal code commands, ones that should have required DNA authentication. Earth had replicated their access sequences down to biological fidelity. In orbit, civilian transports halted mid-route. Civilian traffic control had been hijacked, directing them to drift just within range of power core destabilization fields left floating in open space. Hundreds of ships vaporized without a single warship in range. Panic gripped planetary colonies. Civilian governments collapsed faster than military outposts. Terror was spreading not from conquest, but from precision. No territory was occupied. No declaration was made. Just one unmistakable reality: humanity could strike anywhere, at any time, without being seen. Empire response was disjointed. Fleets recalled to the home system encountered interference along every jumped corridor. Artificial gravity wells forced detours into unstable regions. On board, AI plotted erroneous escape vectors. Pilots reverted to analog navigation. Still, the delays cost lives. Entire reinforcements failed to arrive in time. Some never arrived at all. What few survivors remained from the original Earth invasion were taken off duty. They refused to speak. Their health logs showed declining neurological function. Internal inquiries classified the symptoms as strategic contamination. They had seen something no one else had. And they knew what it meant. Eventually, the Empire ceased all offensive efforts. Remaining fleets were ordered into defensive orbit around core worlds. Civilian evacuation plans were initiated, quietly, without media disclosure. But even these were intercepted. Escape routes were mapped, blocked, redirected into uncharted space. Not one ship returned. Still, no human war fleet arrived. No capital ship darkened the skies. No banners were planted. Earth didn't occupy, they erased. Each strike was a correction. Each system lost was a statement. The war wasn't expanding. It was collapsing inward, from rot the Empire couldn't excise. And through it all, the only message that ever repeated was the first: now we come for you. Nothing more. Nothing less. There was no treaty. No ceasefire. The Empire simply stopped. Entire sectors went dark, military presence withdrawn without a single word issued to the public. Reports were buried, stations abandoned, archives deleted. Official records marked the campaign as inconclusive. In truth, the Empire had lost something more critical than territory. It had lost certainty. The High Command convened behind sealed chambers. No media access, no leaks. Their agenda wasn't strategy, but containment. Internal investigations began targeting their own analysts, those who had underestimated Earth's capabilities, those who had dismissed the veterans' warning. Promotions were revoked. Some vanished under accusations of treason. Others took their own lives before formal charges could be filed. Civil unrest followed. Outer colonies broke rank first. With communication networks crippled and planetary defenses compromised, they renounced their allegiance, claiming neutrality and isolation. No effort was made to bring them back. Imperial loyalists couldn't guarantee their own safety, let alone enforce control across interstellar space. Local governments declared sovereignty not out of ambition, but survival. Education councils erased prior documentation of the Earth incursion. Military academies revised curricula, omitting the campaign entirely. Graduates were taught revised timelines, filtered histories, new doctrines that treated soul as unreachable. Future officers were trained to avoid the subject altogether. If questioned, they recited protocol: unclassified region, low strategic value, no active presence. That was the narrative. and no one challenged it. Among the few who still remembered, Earth became legend. Not as a planet, but as a presence. Cartographers redrew navigational charts to skirt the system entirely. The region surrounding Sol was designated non-operational space, flagged for gravitational instability and high-risk anomalies. No probes were authorized. No exploration permitted. The maps didn't say why. They didn't need to. Across the Empire's inner worlds, children whispered stories of soldiers who never bled, of ships that disappeared without trace, of a planet where silence was the only answer. Fear had become folklore. And yet, beneath the silence, the weight of humiliation endured. The veteran who warned them was released without ceremony. No apology. No record. He returned to obscurity, though his name was never spoken again in official capacity. His homeworld offered him silence. He accepted it. What mattered had already happened. A monument once built to celebrate the campaign's initial launch was dismantled overnight. Not destroyed, dismantled. Each plate removed, each inscription erased. No press covered the demolition. No one claimed responsibility. In its place, an empty pedestal remained. Visitors passed it daily, never asking what once stood there. Empire strategy shifted inward. Expansionism was abandoned. Research budgets were rerouted to internal defense. War simulations stopped modeling unknown civilizations. All external threats were now hypothetical, except one. In classified training modules, instructors referenced a variable enemy, unnamed, with no icon, only an encrypted signature. Simulations failed every time that variable was introduced. No adjustment led to survival past Phase 3. Officers began recording confessions in sealed logs before deployment, messages to loved ones, apologies to subordinates, final thoughts with no expectation of return. Not from combat. From possibility. They feared being sent anywhere near the unknown. Years passed. Then decades. Still, Earth made no move. No ships crossed their borders. No messages escaped their system. They asked for nothing. Demanded nothing. They didn't respond to probes. They didn't retaliate. They simply remained. And that, more than anything, terrified the Empire. Because war could be understood. Peace through force could be rationalized. But silence, pure, intentional silence, was something else. It suggested preparation. Patience. Calculation without desperation. It wasn't the behavior of survivors. It was the posture of a predator no longer hungry, but still watching. Empire scientists tried to decode human behavior once again. Theories were debated behind secure networks. But one consensus emerged: humanity didn't retaliate for vengeance. They acted as if they had been teaching a lesson. Not one of fear, but warning. They hadn't wiped out fleets to destroy the Empire. They had done it to show they could. The message had been sent. Loud. Permanent. Do not return. Do not forget. And above all, never assume silence means surrender.